Hey, you guys. Letitia Morris, brand revivalist and owner of Ox and Iron. Today, I am so excited to get the opportunity to interview the Peter Young, author of 3 books, not one, but 3, and man who is going out creating an incredible legacy impact with the gifts that he has been given. Peter, would you take a quick moment to share a little bit more with our audience about you and some of the things you're doing in this world?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me on. I am an author of 3 books. I'm a father of 5, live just outside of Bozeman, Montana. And I like to give people kind of the humorous Reader's Digest version of my life. I grew up in New Jersey and I was going to be the next Larry Bird. I was so confident and arrogant that I was going to play in the NBA. Well, that didn't happen. I did play in college, but I was not the next Larry Bird. And then I got into coaching basketball and I was going to be the next John Wooden or Mike Krzyzewski. And that didn't happen. And then I got into sports broadcasting and I had a nice run, a nice career, but I thought I was going to be the next Bob Costas, and that didn't happen either. So now that I'm an author in my 50s, I love writing. I love telling stories. I love using the gospel and weaving it into my stories. But I'm not trying to be the next John Grisham or Anthony Doerr or anybody else. The Lord finally got my attention. I learned my lesson. So I'm just trying to be the best me.
I love that. I think it's easy for us to look at so many other people that are in the lane next to us, or they're out there, they're doing amazing things. And be like, oh my gosh, I want to be like that. I want to imitate that or emulate that in what I'm doing. And it's like we miss that just like God made them unique in what it is that he set them to, he made us unique in what it is that he set us to. And that version of unique that he made us is not less than that version that he made them. Right.
Right.
And so I think it's so cool that you were able to come to a place of having confidence in that. Another thing that I love about you, and this just being athlete to athlete, different sports, but I love it, is how you integrate sports into your story, into your books, and into how you get to share the gospel. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So my first book's called The Blue Team. It took a long time for me to write, on and off for, 20 plus years. And then when I finally discovered what I really wanted the novel to say, the message, right? So all great novels, Latricia, have something beyond plot and character. It might be about revenge or love or family, patriotism, whatever. Well, mine are sharing the gospel. So like, for instance, for The Blue Team, the story within the story is that your worst enemy is not the guy trying to block your shot or the teammate who won't pass you the ball or the coach who won't start you. It's your own mind. And when the Lord saves us, he saves us from ourself, the old mind that Paul talks about in Romans. So that's not to say that, when you become a Christian, you're going to hit the game winning shot. What it means is that if you miss the game winning shot, life doesn't end because your identity is in Christ. It's in something greater than you. What you do and love is basketball. It may sound like splitting hairs, but that's a big difference. And it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about wanting to be the next somebody else. That, again, is trying to put your identity in something other than where it belongs, and it belongs in Christ. First and foremost, we are Christians, followers of Christ.
I love that. I see that often, particularly like in my own sport where I know a lot of athletes that are in competitive boxing, kickboxing, different martial arts. And I have seen the downside and the sense of devastation that can come on the other side of attaching our identity to that outcome in that moment. We forget that it's just like that it could, you could have a loss or missed shot or whatever happen. It just some random something that happened in that moment. And then, transitioning that into looking at the business realm and entrepreneurship, how easy is it for us to attach our identity to the level of success that we believe we've achieved or have not achieved
Right.
based on that? That was, something that had come to mind earlier was, thinking about contentment in, especially in business and challenges and stuff like that. And it's that if we're not content with the Lord in those moments of challenge, pressure, hardship, then we're not actually content in the Lord,
Right.
right?
Right.
That we somehow put our contentment, our satisfaction, our identity in the circumstance as opposed to in him, which makes it, makes us secure. So one of the things that you said is that we either conquer the mind or the mind
Mhm.
conquers us. What brought you to really understanding that principle in maybe in your own journey with authoring your books or just in life in general?
Well, it took a long time for me to learn that lesson. I guess I could be very stubborn, and so the the Lord had to really work on me to teach me that lesson. But to help people understand it, I always give the analogy of golf, and I'm horrible at golf. But let's say you and I are at our country club, and we're on the putting green. and our favorite putter's in our hand, little white ball, and we're just practicing a 10-foot putt over and over again. No big deal, right? Now we're on the 18th green of the Masters, and we have a one-shot lead. And Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, whoever you want, is one shot behind us. There's millions of people watching, millions of dollars on the line. Well, if you're a golfer, your hands and palms are starting to sweat, right? Well, what's the difference? It's the same 10-foot putt, same putter, same ball. It's what we bring to the moment in our mind. And as someone that had, nominal success, I did play college basketball. I did coach college basketball. I was on network TV, but I was never anywhere as good as I wanted to be. And yeah, it would have helped if I was, 6'9" and a stud athlete versus 6'5". I can look back and realize that in many of those moments, it really was me holding myself back for a variety of reasons. And, when you kind of prefaced your question, I was thinking about, the verse that talks about give thanks in all circumstances. And that's a hard thing to do when you fail. But when you fail as an athlete, these are all learning experiences. I mean, think about it. If you fail 7 out of 10 times as a baseball player, you're an all-star, right? If you miss half your shots, you're an all-star. So really, it comes down to your perspective and how you view things. And I think really, if you don't have faith in a higher power, obviously for us, it's Christ. I think that's hard to do. I don't know how that person would do that.
Yeah, that is so good. So good. Love it. You talking about high pressure moments. One of the things that I learned a while back ago, I was, back when I was doing a lot more competition and stuff like that, was when a coach actually stopped to talk to us with the US team. And he was sharing about many of the greats that are out there that have been professional and had many fights in front of so many people. And it was understanding that even those people that are at that level still struggled with having the physical or physiological responses to the stress in that situation. You have like Tyson and all of these others that would still like throw up in the back before they went out. And this is something they've done how many times over, right? And what it really prompted me to be mindful of when I would come against challenges, not just in sport, but especially in business, where we have those moments where we're facing a decision that feels like, oh, there's a lot on the line here, is that separating the feelings that we're having from the truth of the situation and what we perceive is going to happen through that situation, right? Because humans tend to have a bias to assume the negative or fear the negative, the uncertain. But it's like when we know that whether we win or lose, we win in Christ, that changes the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What I love to do, and I share this in my novel, the first one, The Blue Team. The head coach. So there's a main player, Thomas. He's playing college basketball, and his coach is a wise guy, not a wise individual, mature individual. And he draws this parallel between Philippians 4, 6, and 7 and John Wooden's definition of success. Of course, Wooden won 10 national championships. And the verse in Philippians says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, not part of your understanding, all of it, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So then John Wooden, who was a believer, follower of Christ, his definition of success, and here's a guy that won multiple national championships, his idea of success was, and I'm paraphrasing, knowing that you did your best and you gave your best in that moment. And that knowledge, that peace of mind, knowing you gave your best, that's success. And I remember the first time I read that, I was blown away, because here's a guy that was incredibly successful, yet his definition of success looked like it was straight out of the Bible. And I found that fascinating, that really, in the end, do we remember the missed shots? Do we remember the made shots from 10, 20, 30 years ago? No, but we remember how hard we worked. We remember the satisfaction of being a good teammate, etc.
That is so good. I know, like, I kind of ran into that with my own experience, where there's that, like, when you know that you really gave it your all, you really did the best that you could, whatever the outcome was, and like what that looks like, what, how you really process your, I don't want to say identity, but just even what you brought to it.
Right.
as opposed to like coming out of it. I've had fights that I won that I thought I did terribly, and I've had ones
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
actually lost on a split decision. That was
yeah,
like, my trainer, and he just blows no smoke up
yeah,
anybody's skirt. Like he pulls no punches, and him
yeah,
coming out of one that I there was one that was like he was like that was the best I ever saw you fought, and I lost it on a split decision. It's
mm,
like stuff like that can happen. Did you really bring your best? Did you
right,
really give your all into that? So, what do
right.
you feel like are some mental traps that people can fall into when it comes to those mind games that we have a tendency to play with ourselves, and maybe even like causing us to hold ourselves back where we should be pressing forward?
Well, one of them, to me, the most obvious one, as again, as I looked back. So when I started writing, this was after my playing and coaching career and as a broadcaster, and I was able to have 20/20 vision. Not all the time, but most of the time. And one of the lessons was, you ask yourself, why are you doing this? Why are you playing? Why are you fighting? Why are you a skier or a boxer or whatever it is? And you really have kind of two options. You do it because you love it. You love the sport, or because you need something from it. You want it to stroke your
Mm,
identity. It is your identity. Well, if your identity is as a basketball player and you want to make sure that you score your 20 points and you get your 10 rebounds, and if you don't feel good about yourself, you're not going to be a very good teammate. You are going to be very selfish. You're going to take. But if you play the game because you
mm,
love it, you fight because you just love doing it. You have a gift that the Lord gave you, and you're going to give it your all, win or lose. You'll be satisfied with the effort. That's when you can give. That's when you can be a good teammate. And I remember when that realization really hit me, I thought, wow, that is really kind of the key, because the Bible talks about there's no fear in love, right? So the fear, you think, well, where's
mm.
fear in sports? Well, again, go to that putter. He's got 10-foot putt, right? Go to the basketball player. He's got to hit 2 free throws with no time on the clock. Sometimes that could induce fear. But if you love the game and love what you do, that fear really gets pushed to the background.
Yeah, I feel like it just totally sets your mind in a different state, in a totally different place that you're operating from. And one of the things I was thinking about with looking at that is like how, the difference in where we're building. I know I've often been called to really stop and process, where I'm at with my business or where I'm at with life in the context of like, am I more operating from a space of what I'm running from, or rather who I'm running to, right?
Right,
Because they're very different contexts. It might seem
right,
like a little bit of a word tilt, but it's like, am I running from fear? Am I running from ego? Am I running from insecurity and all of those things? Or is
right,
it that I'm saying, okay, I am so passionate about the mission that God has set me to that I want to go
right,
all out and all in for that?
right,
Totally different approach. And I
right,
think too, like the energy that you bring to it, as well as the runway that you have to get that plane off the ground,
mm,
like running from something gets very
yep,
exhausting. It gets
right,
very
right.
exhausting. But like, and not saying that when you're passionately running into something that you don't get a little tired, but I feel like there's just a different fire. So what would you say as far as how can someone really discern that though, between
Mm.
like what they're building as being part of them looking for approval or doing it based off of their sense of calling and assignment?
Well, I would think that James chapter 1, again, I'm paraphrasing, that if you lack wisdom, ask and the Lord will give it to you. He will be generous, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea. I don't have the wisdom to accurately answer the
Mm.
questions you just gave me, but the Lord does. And so I could think back again to, all my experiences. And I'm like, well, how did I learn this? How did I learn that? Well, it's because I asked for wisdom and I asked for discernment. And I think the question you just posed to me is a really important one that people need to ask themselves. Why are you doing this? Is it bringing you joy? Do you feel like this is serving the kingdom, right? That you are using your talents for the kingdom versus using them exclusively for yourself. And I'm a believer, and I know that the Lord has given me wisdom when I've asked him for that. And to me, a question like that also, again, like you said, it might seem like maybe this is semantics or splitting hairs. I don't think so. I think these questions are foundational. They're very important.
Yes. And when we talk about like what that core driver is, what is actually motivating our action, what is compelling us to
Mhm.
do that thing or run that business or take that job or play that sport, like I think just as much as it can be from, there's that discernment piece of like, am I doing it out of fear and what I'm trying to run from or what I'm trying to run to? But also, I think the definitions that we've accepted in life as far as maybe what success looks like. And I think you do well about hitting on that, on helping people to redefine what success means apart from all the worldly stuff and
Right.
the stuff that we see on social media. How would you help to challenge somebody who maybe really struggles with how they're defining success and maybe how that's governing their lives?
Good question. And I will give you the example from my life. I was so obsessed with being a great basketball player that, when I was playing against somebody, I would often really try to nitpick and tear that person down. And the only reason I would do that is to try and lift
Mm.
myself up and make myself feel better about my game and how good I was. And I wasn't that good. I was okay. But so then I would look at other people and instead of appreciating their gifts, their talents, like, wow, that person's really good. Who cares if they're better than me? When I was all about me, I couldn't do that. Okay. So now that I'm a writer, and I'm not trying to be the greatest writer ever. I'm trying to be the greatest writer I can be. I can now read someone else's work, another novel, and say, wow, that guy's incredible. That's an incredible novel. What great writing. And I can truly appreciate it. So think about then yourself or for our audience. If you have a hard time doing that, you can't appreciate what someone else brings to the table. Let's say they're in your corporation or they're a competitor, they own the pizza restaurant down the street. If you find yourself constantly trying to tear other people down, to me, that's a red flag, right? Appreciate other people and what they can do because really, your journey is about you and how much better you get. I think about Alex Honnold, okay, the guy that did the free solo of El Capitan, and then he just climbed that building in Taipei. And what he does is remarkable. To me, his ability when he climbed El Capitan without any safety harnesses or ropes, and they made a documentary about it. It's fascinating. What he did was really kind of the greatest mental sports achievement I've ever seen. And the reason I'm giving you this story is because when he competed, what he did was only about he and the rock. There was nobody else. He didn't have to compete about anybody else. And to me, that's what it really boils down to, is that you really are competing against yourself. And if you can do that in a healthy way, then you won't try to tear down other people. That was a long-winded answer, but hopefully I answered your question.
So that's okay. I mean, there's like still yet so much I feel like we could continue to unpack
Sure.
there. I know when it comes to that idea of like, where you're seeing yourself and that being able to be confident in the work that you do without feeling the need to tear somebody else down. One of the things that I felt like the Lord was just peeling back layers on layers of helping me to better understand where it was an operation in my own life, as well as in so many other people. What I knew was that sense of insecurity, that root of
Mhm.
insecurity,
Mhm.
and how when we get caught up in a sense of insecurity, that's when we do start lashing out or biting at other people or tearing other people down, because our ego is attempting to leverage that as a way to soothe itself and elevate itself, as opposed to us being secure and confident in who God has made us to be. And
Right.
so when we shift into that place where you're like, you know what, I'm not saying I'm the best of the best, and if God determines for me to be a best in my current culture, great. And if he doesn't, like, he's still good and he's still God, and I'm still okay.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't change any of that. It's not going to make me any more or less loved like than I already am.
Right.
So like there's a sense of confidence I think that we can take and find in our security in him, and being able to just be and make the mistakes and miss the shots and still show up and feel no less than we felt 3 days ago or 3 months ago, or where we, hope to be in the future.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I think for our society it's so counterintuitive, right? That as a Christian, our ego is constantly day after day after day, being submitted and crushed down as we grow and mature and are sanctified in our faith. And so, like you just said, sure we want to hit the game-winning shot, sure we want to make that putt that's going to win the championship, and all of those things. But really, when making the shot or the putt don't determine our self-worth, society might say you didn't want it hard enough, you didn't dig deep enough, it didn't mean enough to you. I think it's the exact opposite. I think it takes the pressure off the athlete in that moment. I still want to hit the
Mm.
game winning shot, but knowing my life won't collapse if I miss it, makes me more relaxed, right? Well, who's going to make the game winning shot or the
Mm,
game winning putt? The guy that's tight and tense and nervous, or the guy that's relaxed? So, again, I think it's counterintuitive to our
yep.
society. I think the believer has the advantage in that moment mentally.
I agree, and I love that you went there because when it comes to that, the idea of being okay when you miss the shot, being relaxed, being confident. Here last year, I had the opportunity to go on a show called The Blocks. It's a show for entrepreneurs. I got to come alongside a lot of other entrepreneurs, and it was really a great time, intense, a lot of learning. But one of the things that I felt like I picked up in sort of like the training that led up to that, because they do like business courses and stuff like that, was where we really talked heavily about lean startup methodology and how that plays into business. Now, why I say that I felt like that tied right into what you were talking about is that one of the things that they hit on is understanding that when we go into business, we can get very tense and caught up about whether any decision is going to pan out. What's going to happen if this business doesn't succeed. Well, when you look at some of the most successful people on the planet, when you look at the Russell Brunsons and you look at the Tony Robbins and you look at all of these people, they have a track record that where they were not winning with every decision. They made decisions that didn't pan out. As much confidence as they had, as well educated as they were, as much practice as they put into it, as much heart as they put into it, sometimes things did not pan out, but they did not let it hold them back. They did not let it take over who they believed themselves to be,
Right.
but continued to press forward. And so that kind of takeaway that I had from that was in looking at our business plans and all of our greatest ideas, that really, until we bring it out into the market, it's all just hypothesis, it's all
Right.
just a best guess, right? And God allows us, just like we let our kids explore the things. Like I have kids that'll be like, well, what if we did this? And I'm like, I might know I might know like that isn't going to work. Like
Right.
just based off experience, been there, tried that. But sometimes you let them explore the things so that
Right.
they learn and they grow, because you have more in mind than just telling them it's going to work or it's not. And I think same with God and how he fathers us
Right.
is that he allows us to go through the process where we don't make all the shots, we don't necessarily get all the wins, but we do get the bigger win of what we learn in that process. And I think that is a far greater gold than any of the championships or anything else that we could ever
Right.
take hold of, or even the most successful businesses, because he's here. Abba Father, creator and sustainer of all life, has taken the time to be mindful of us as that individual
Right.
child that he's teaching and growing
Right.
and instructing.
Well, and like, we're both parents. There are times where, clearly you try and protect your child, but there are some lessons where the child kind of needs to get a little burn when they touch the stove, right? That's how we learn. You need to actually feel that little bit of pain, and that's how we learn. And the analogy you just gave when it comes to sports is, if you have allowed fear of failure to take over, and you are the guy that's supposed to take the game winning shot, and you don't because you're afraid to miss it, then that is allowing fear to take over. If you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, and you fear failure, that you never launch that business, you never launch that new app because you're afraid of what people will say. One of my favorite Bible stories that I think is applicable here is, you go back to Joshua, and the Israelites know that they have been given the land on the other side of the Jordan. God has told them, that's your land. And so the priests who are carrying the ark, they don't sit down on the shore next to the Jordan and wait for the water to stop, and also they can walk across on dry ground. The Jordan River is, kind of at flood stage, and they get their feet wet. So they got the ark and they walk into the water, and their feet get wet, and then the water stops. And I love that, because it's like God says, you know what, you got to get the car out of park and start moving, and then I can use you. You have to make the effort. You
Mm.
have to show and demonstrate faith. And that's what the priests did. They demonstrate the faith. Okay, again, in sports and in business, demonstrate the faith. Take the shot, right? Launch the business. Don't sit on the sidelines afraid.
I love that so much. I hadn't really processed that story in that way, but you're right. There's so many times over where it's like God does call us to, take that step of faith, to put that
Right,
faith into action. And he shows up in incredible ways like only he can.
right, right,
But we don't see that like, okay, he prayed the thing and then he sat in his chair and he waited for it to come to be. And I think that's something that's like, we see some people try to fall into that idea that like, well, God says that it's going to be and that I'm going to have it. So I'm going to sit here and wait. And it's like, what are you doing? Like,
Right.
are you being faithful with what he's entrusted to you? And some of it too can be a lot of it obviously is that mind game. So what would you say are some things that you've learned and that you might share with other people on how you approach that training of the mind to get
Mhm.
into a healthier way of thinking and really putting our mindset in a kingdom context instead of defaulting to a lot of the things that we do.
Well, my answer might be a little unsatisfactory because it was really a lifetime of taking my lumps. Again, it's a kind of a cute little anecdotal story to say I wanted to be the next Larry Bird and I wanted to be the next John Wooden and I wanted to be the next Bob Costas. Well, buried within those layers are a lot of failure. I mean, yes, I was good enough to play college basketball. Yes, I was good enough as a broadcaster to be on network TV. But there were a lot of times where I did fail. I wasn't that good at basketball. I didn't make the NBA. I kind of got let go from one of my better broadcasting jobs. And so being able to learn those lessons when we are given them. I mean, again, you have the choice. You can learn the lesson. You can be thankful. You can ask for wisdom, or you can get bitter and get angry. And, I'm in my 50s and I didn't really learn all this until I was, mid to late 40s. And sometimes it takes a long time for us to learn the lessons that the Lord has given us. And I don't know if I'm really answering your question very well because I've learned it. I know I have, because I have a much healthier attitude and outlook towards my writing in a much healthier aspect to where I just, I do my best. I put it out there and I'm not trying to be, the next John Grisham. But boy, it took a long time, Patricia. I mean, it took a really long time for the Lord to help me learn that lesson. So a lot of prayer, but also a lot of, taking my lumps.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to that battle of the mind, I know there are several people out there that have taught on that a lot in the Christian context. One of my favorites is Dr. Caroline Leaf. I love how she really breaks it out from a neuroscientific perspective.
Hmm.
And it was so cool how, like, I got to see, and I'm not saying I've arrived because I have not arrived, but back when I was really experiencing God walking me through that process, it was actually before I got my hands on the books that she released, like right as I went through like a major life transition where he really started peeling back the layers on me and helping me to see that so many of the things I was struggling with, from disordered eating patterns, compulsive overeating, stuff with my health, depression, you name it, how a lot of it was going back to those roots of what it was that I was allowing myself to think. And when you look at the word, it says to be transformed by the renewing of the mind, not the latest gadget, not the latest AI, not, a circle of your best buddies, like have friendships, have resources, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I say that because like it's a reminder that we need to meet God with that. And that if we're, allowing ourselves to meditate on the wrong things, then it's not that God has put that on us or that he has failed in helping to lift a thing from us and heal us from that. It's that we're not forcing those thoughts into obedience to Christ and allowing him to help us redefine the things that maybe have gotten you kind of like misconceptualized along the way.
Yeah, and I would say too that, the idea of renewing your mind, I also think back to then, pick up your cross and carry it daily. These aspects of faith and our mind are also kind of right in parallel with being an athlete. You don't get to be a great athlete by practicing one day a week. You don't go to the gym and lift weights or shoot free throws on a Monday and then expect to be a great athlete on Saturday. It's a daily process, just like it is with our faith. And for me, again, it took a long time. But again, with great athletes, it takes a long time. I mean, the athletes, they start playing at a young age, and it's high school and college, and then they're pros, and they've dedicated years of their lives. I look back at some of the big moments for me that, yes, I lost my job. Wasn't as good a basketball player as I wanted to be. But also one of the things too, is I became a father. And when you become a parent, you really are forced to look outside of yourself and not just consider your own needs and own wants. And it wasn't hard. I mean, I love being a parent, but that clearly helped shape and mature me. And I find it so ironic too that we are at our physical peaks at a stage in our life where we are anything but at our peak emotionally and mentally, right? Like we got a long way to go in our 20s when it comes to our emotional and mental acuity. But yet that's when our physical peak happens. It's fascinating.
Hmm. I want to actually clip back a little bit too. And I think this goes along with like the parenting aspect and then also helping us to redefine what we believe to be the successful life, right? Like there was so long there, and we still see some of it today where, people get caught up in chasing a lifestyle or a thing that is not really even their picture of success. It's just kind of like what they come up believing success was supposed to look like. And now I'm seeing more of a trend towards finding a state of peace, living on less, not getting caught up in a lot of the social norms and the trends and stuff like that, as far as using that to define like what life success means. What do you
Mm,
feel like was part of your process in making that transition from like the world's definition of success to
right.
embracing things like peace of mind and those things being part of your picture of life success?
Well, for me, it really happened when I hit rock bottom. So, we talked about the two novels I wrote, The Blue Team and Wardrobe of the Wolf. The third book that I've published is a memoir called Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. And, we'll just briefly touch on it because this could be, several more podcasts in and of itself. But I unwittingly joined a tiny but destructive religious cult when I married the love of my life. And, I didn't plan on
Oh,
joining the
wow.
cult. I didn't think the guy was a cult leader, but my wife adored the guy. We called him Uncle Robert. He wasn't related to any of us. Turned out to be that he was a cult leader. And so after, 20 years of marriage, my marriage was destroyed. She left me to draw closer to him. Then Uncle Robert and my wife started to teach our five children that I was the devil, that I was Satan, that I was a sorcerer. So my kids are starting to believe this. So my kids have been alienated from me. I've lost my marriage. And this Uncle Robert character had caused me to doubt my faith. And for years, I had questioned him, thought he was nuts, didn't want anything to do with him. But my wife loved him and adored him. So I went along to get along. So I eventually became brainwashed. So all that to say is this is around 2017 when this happened, when she left me. I was never suicidal, but I mean, I hit rock bottom hard. And, when you lose everything, but not really everything, when you lose almost everything, then, things get really, really crystal clear about what's important. I mean, I had lost my marriage. My kids thought I was the devil, but I never lost my faith. I might have had my mind, my eyes and ears, blinded and stopped up and couldn't see that. But really, when your life comes crashing down around you like mine did, again, you get really crystal clear on what's important. That is your faith. That is the eternal perspective. So I've recovered since then. I'm a million times stronger because of what the Lord has done for me and through me in my life. And so now I have such a clear and healthy perspective on what is most important for me to do with my time, with my energy, and my talents. And I always tell people that I'm very thankful for the lessons that I've learned through all of the suffering I went through. But I also say that I wish I could have learned these lessons in an easier way. Um, but that was not what was meant to be. The Lord knew what I needed, and He was able to get my attention. And so, I'm reading a book now by C.S. Lewis called The Problem of Pain. And he basically talks about how the Lord can use pain as like a megaphone to get our attention. And just like that child, the analogy of the child having to kind of, touch the stove without obviously burning their hand off, but that little bit of pain gets our attention. And sometimes, because we are so
Hmm.
stubborn, that's how the Lord gets our attention.
Yeah. Well, I love that you pointed out that it was a time that allowed you to see things with better clarity. And I think there's this sense of like one of the sayings that is like I've heard of people say it for decades and I'm like to me it's just such a false doctrine of when people say, "Oh, well the Lord's just testing you." I'm like the Lord doesn't need to test me to know what's
Right,
in me.
right,
He already knows what's in me. He allows me to go through it so I see what's in me. And so that
Right.
I see things differently. He doesn't need to test to get a result. He already knows. He
Right.
knows how I'm going to respond. He knows how I'm going to react. And I think that it's cool. Like when we look at the story of Job, and I praise God that in the midst of my worst suffering, it's never been to the extent of what Job
Right.
went through. He knew how Job was going to respond, and he knew full
Right.
well how he was going to restore Job.
Right.
There had to have been so much that we don't get to read about as far as Job's relationship with God on the other side of that. I know for me, it's like when I go through seasons of hardships, like, man, I wish there was an easier way to learn all of this. But sometimes he does allow you to stop and see, like, if all of these things were taken away, or if everything else feels like it's crashing down around you, like knowing that you can still lean into God and find
Right.
that peace that surpasses all understanding in Him. You don't get that not going through the things. Like knowing that God is with us is beautiful, and him being with us in the times when everything is bright and happy and cheerful and blessings are just flowing, that's great. But I think there's something that's often not appreciated as much as we probably could appreciate, having the God that is in the trenches with us and that meets us at our lowest points. He doesn't love us any less. It's us going through those things is not that his favor has left us. It's not that
Right.
he doesn't care. It's that he is allowing us to see and experience something that's going to come with a greater reward, a greater fruit, a greater result on the other
Right.
side of us just trusting him through it.
And the analogy I would give to help explain what you just said beautifully would be just again, think about the basketball coach. If the basketball coach is not kind of getting on you, hey, Peter, follow through, bend your knees, get in a better defensive stance. And he's, telling that to other players. Well, he doesn't care about you because the good coach, the one that really loves the player, is going to point out the flaws so the player can learn and get better simultaneously or in like manner. If the coach is not running you hard in practice to the point where you're about to throw up, right? Well, he's not preparing you for the game. The coach that is easy on you
Mm.
doesn't really love you, doesn't really care about you. It's the coach that pushes you. Practice is painful. Practice might not be very fun. I don't like it when coach kind of chews me out and tells me to get lower in my defensive stance. Okay, then you could play for a coach that's not going to prepare you for the game. We have a Father in heaven that prepares us for life. And again, all of this stuff, I love the analogies of sport. It just makes it so easy, these sports analogies, to explain the principles of our faith and of business and whatever it may be.
That there is one of the things that I told you I love about how you approach the gospel, and I wanted to hit on that also. So I'm so glad you went there as far as being able to draw the parallels
Mhm.
from what it is that you're already involved in with people and tie that to the gospel. And I think that it applies in sport and really any other hobby, right? That's one of the things when we look at Jesus and how he taught. He so often taught with parables and
Right,
drawing parallels to something that they already
right,
understood based off of just daily living. It wasn't just, hey, come sit around. I'm going to explain the gospel straight to you. You're going to take notes and then
right,
you're going to figure it out. It was
right,
like, well, look at this. I know he's done that plenty of
right,
times with like sport and the garden and all of that. But I think it's a good reminder to people who are in business that are saying, you know what, I want my business to operate in more of a kingdom context and make more of a kingdom impact. And
right,
sometimes it feels a little awkward thinking, well, how do I draw the connection between sharing the gospel and what we're doing in the day when they treat them as very separate things, right? Like without the analogy or without those
right,
parallels, and they're just saying straight gospel in a law firm setting, straight gospel in whatever, insert whatever business there. Yet you beautifully tie in what people who are basketball players and in love of sport are able to
right.
already process, already understand, and put that into terms that they can understand the gospel in a better way. What are some things that you've learned along the way as far as that goes with being able to tie that story
Yeah.
into the story that people are already living?
Well, we learn through stories. I mean, that's the simplest way to answer that question. And any great, writer or business leader or coach will tell you that we learn best through stories. Again, in the Gospels, we call them parables. When Christ spoke to his followers, they were stories. They're very good stories. And I believe that he used agriculture for many of his stories because that's what his audience knew. And one of the best pieces of writing advice I was ever given was write what you know. Well, I've played basketball, I've coached basketball, I've been a broadcaster on basketball games for ESPN, and I've written novels about basketball. So that's what I know. So I take what I know and then I weave stories that help explain gospel principles. So I love writing, I love a good story. But the reason I tell these stories is to help share the gospel. And I also say to people that, even if you don't know the gospel, you're going to get it, whether you know it or not, when you read my novels, because the principles are embedded in the story. And you think back to your own life, and you're right. How many great textbooks, how many dry, antiseptic textbooks do you remember reading? None. But you remember a really good novel, right? You remember those really good novels that you read. And a good novel is going to also have a good message and a good story. And I realize as a writer, like, my time is valuable. I don't want to read a bad book. And so I try and be aware of that and cognizant of that with my audience. Okay, they're giving me their time. I'm going to try and make it worthwhile. So it's not just a book about basketball, but it's going to share the biblical principles. So again, like in my first book, main story within the story is that, when the Lord saves us, he saves us from our own mind. And when we put our identity in him, it frees us up to be, more relaxed and more free to do better things with whatever we're doing. My second book, Wardrobe of the Wolf, it's still the two main characters. And, the message within that one is that main character is now a head coach and he's a husband. And his marriage is on the rocks and it's being threatened. And so family and marriage have to come before career, right? Like if you have a great career, but you don't have family to share it with, you don't have a spouse, to me, it lacks depth. So that's kind of the message of the second book.
So there are a lot of people that are listening in that also have gifts of different stories and books within them that are just waiting to be brought out into the
Yeah.
world. And I know, like, I've come across a number of people and I've walked it myself too, with like understanding that you can have that. There's the process of like bringing it out, getting it written, and then there's also the process of getting it out into the world, where sometimes we think like, oh, okay, we're going to write this really great book and everybody's just going to run to the store and buy it, and it's like, that's not really true. That's not how it really works. You seem like you do a lot to put yourself out there, really develop your personal brand, and help to get those stories out there to the people that need them. What are some things that you learned along the way, maybe especially in light of like the expectations you had coming in versus some of the maybe the challenges and solutions that you came to realize stepping into it?
Well, I would say one of the first answers to your many questions is, you live and learn. So, I've published 3 books, working on my fourth. It'll come out later this year. You make mistakes along the way, you learn from them, try not to make them again. I also surround myself with a very good team. So, I do all of my own writing, but I've got a gal that is a believer. So she understands the faith aspect of all my books. She is an editor. And then I have another person that is the proofreader, just checking in for the grammar, the punctuation, the
Mm.
spelling. And then I have another friend that is an excellent graphic designer. She does all my book covers. And then I go online and I kind of search out these people that are experts in Amazon ads and Facebook ads. So I surround myself with people who know what they're doing in areas that I just don't. And I make sure I get really good help. And I would also say too, for the person, because we all have a story within us. We all have a story. And I encourage you to tell it. And if you think, well, I'm not a good writer, okay, you should read my first drafts because they're horrible. And that's why they're first drafts. So when I write, I'm a grinder. I mean, my editor is going to read my books 4 or 5 times. And I'll have written that first draft probably 3 times before she even looks at it. So I do multiple drafts. I really work at my craft. And yeah, nobody's writing is perfect, but you're the expert on your story. And if you have been given a good story, I encourage everybody to tell it, because you think about it, what is your testimony, right? In the Christian faith, we often share our testimony. Our testimony is simply this: what has the Lord done for you? And we are to share that. And sometimes that story is a book. And don't be shy. Don't worry about the naysayers. Put it out there.
Yeah. I love you said sometimes it's a book. Like sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's an article, sometimes it's a video, sometimes it's a, but one of the things that I have loved along the way is just shifting into, we get so caught up in like, I don't want to share the grimy things. I don't want to share the things that I went through. But it's like, no, it's all part of God's glory story in my life. One of the things that you hit on too was that concept that I appreciated learning years back was like, get okay with writing messy. Right. And
Yeah.
that being that it's like we can get so hung up and just frozen in place when it comes to writing a thing if we are in a mindset that we have to get it, that winning shot right out the gate, like for, like slam dunk. I just wrote it out and it's like most authors don't write that way.
Right.
At least
Right.
my own experience and my understanding, different people who've gone out and done the thing publishing books. It's like you write messy because it allows you the space to get the thoughts and ideas out onto paper. And then from that point, it's a lot easier to reorganize and rewrite and say, how could I say that better?
Hmm.
As opposed to saying, let me make sure that this one paragraph starting page 1 of chapter 1 is
Right.
exactly locked in as it needs to be. And then approaching like by the time you get to page 2, you're like off track from what you even wrote because you're so caught up in
Right.
that, like so hyper focused. So it's like, write it messy, go through, clean it up, and then understand that you can clean it up again. And I think another thing that I love too was like, you were like, nobody's writing's perfect. And we're at a point now where I've heard a lot of people just have AI write it. But the problem that I
Mm.
personally see is that it really misses, like, AI is not a human, and it
Right.
might I won't even say it's nailing it when it comes to grammatically correct, right? Like, because it's when I see
Yeah.
some of it, I'm like, that's not proper English, But then there's also the side of it. It's like it the telling of story and the
Right.
details that we pick up on as humans, the tonality. I think there is a market that is actually refreshed by seeing things not worded perfectly, but worded like we're sitting here talking to each other. What is your take on that from your seat and what you're seeing shift in the industry?
And I'm like you, I realize that in certain applications, AI is pretty darn incredible, with the things it can do. I'm also not a big fan of AI. I do really think it's opening up of Pandora's box, and it could, if
Mm-hmm.
it's not used properly, cause a lot of problems in our society. And so I really don't like the idea of us giving over the idea of storytelling to a computer. To me, the ability to write and to tell stories is something we should all be good at. And we don't want to allow a computer to do that for us, because then, we're not growing in our mental acuity and mental capacity. These are skills that we want. We don't want to give this over to a machine. I don't think, like, I get it. In the Bible, everybody walked from here to there. And I love the fact that I've got a car. I love the fact that I can fly across country in a plane. But to me, this is different, right? Like, to me, you want to stretch and grow and challenge your own mind. You don't want a computer to do your thinking and writing for you. So I'm not a big fan of that. I wonder what it'll look like. Actually, Latricia, in a few years, will it be like, in my mind, I'm thinking you go to the grocery store and there's organic and non-organic. In the writing world, it'll be non-AI, and people will advertise it as such. And there will be books that have AI. And I don't know. I have a feeling
Right.
it will go there. I don't use any AI at all. Like, I'm also a real estate broker that pays the bills, and it's very tempting to just have the AI write this little bit about another 3-bed 2-bath house. Oh my gosh, what do I say about this? I don't do it. I want to challenge myself and make my mind do the work. So I write all of my advertising, and everything. I just don't want AI taking over that role in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a balance to be had because, there's some stuff it's like, okay, if it's making way for more relationships and it's not actually taking humans out of it, then I'm like, I can appreciate that with like streamlining processes, automations, getting quick answers to questions. Like, okay, sure. But
Right.
my concern more, especially when it comes to authors and people that are putting content out there, is like, don't don't diminish the value of your story or hold back on you telling it, because there is something about that authentic storytelling, story sharing, and us being able to share each other's like life journeys that is truly special and really needed. When we're looking at how we're hit and impacted by a story, there's so many things that come from that human to human connection that actually
Right.
help to move us and inspire us way more than what we're ever going to get with something that takes all of that out of it.
What you just said, and a few minutes ago about not really wanting to share all kind of the messy details of our life. I love the story in Luke chapter 8. There's a man that's demon possessed, and he kind of lives right outside of town. He's in the caves, and nobody could ever bind him before. And the guy's life is, it's pretty horrific. Christ saves him, he casts the demons out, and then the man begs Jesus to let him follow him. Literally, he uses that word. He begs him. And Christ has something else in mind for him. He says, no, I want you to go back to your home and you tell everyone what the Lord has done for you. Well, you want to talk about a messy story. The guy was demon possessed. He was out of his mind. He was living in caves. He might have had clothes on. And yet that's the story Christ wanted him to tell, because that story and our messiness, the messiness of our lives, of mine, I was in a cult, for goodness sake. That messiness just simply points to the glory and the power of our Lord, right? It magnifies what he has done for us. And oh, by the way, those stories like that, those human stories, you couldn't make that up. A computer's not going to come up with that. That only comes from real lives.
So true. And when we look at like how we carry ourselves in business in particular, especially as entrepreneurs, I think there's a real challenge there. And some of it's contextual. Some businesses maybe allow you a little bit more liberty, but there's sort of an almost unspoken, or for the majority of the time it's an unspoken expectation that we show up a certain way. We don't want to come in with like trauma dumping and all of these things where we kind of like send red flags up that send people running, right? But then there's also allowing ourselves to get close enough to people for God to work in his timing, that when it is a moment where he's calling us to share that story, that we can do so, and to do so with dignity. And I say that because here recently I had the opportunity to be interviewed by Lauren Burns, and she does a lot in helping people share their redemption stories and their stories of reconciliation, and just being like, when we go through life stuff, especially coming from backgrounds of enduring trauma, and similar to how that guy that Jesus saved that way from being demon possessed, it can feel very cringe, very icky to like share that we were actually in that place, that we actually did those things, for him to say, oh my gosh, I was so demon possessed. I was, gnashing and pulling at things and all, like, who would want to share that? But at the end of it, it's like, is that our sense of self-preservation and pride that's standing in the way of sharing the story, particularly with others who may be battling their own demons that they wouldn't want to share about with anybody because they feel ashamed, they feel whatever with that. And then sometimes, like, I remember seeing years back when I was helping with a Bible study, Wednesday night Bible study with a bunch of women, and we were doing a study on so long insecurity. It was a Beth Moore book. And I remember the first time I saw that book in the store, and it was on one of the end caps, and I saw it, and my first thought was, my sister needs that book. Because
somebody else does. Right?
Somebody else does. I was so oblivious to the fact that I was writhing in it, and I didn't even realize it. But then here, God had it work out where the lead pastor of that church, she asked me to come help with the Bible study. I ended up taking the icky bits off of the first half of the book on like getting everything brought to the surface and like peeling back layers, uncovering things. And as I got into the book, I was like, oh my gosh, I needed this book. I needed this. But then I went to do that Bible study, and there were several women in there. Like, culturally, it was a very different place where we were living at that particular time. There's a lot of poverty, a lot of gang activity, and this, that, and the other. I had already again, not that I had arrived, but at that point, if you were looking at the external, I'm sitting here, I'm just this newly married mom, I'm pregnant, all this other look like, life is just fine, right? Never would they have guessed that I had been through so many of the things that I went through. But then here, as I started to share and allow God the room to work through that testimony, you could see the walls come down with these women that were carrying these things for so long, and they felt like they had no free space or safe space to share it, because what are people going to think? Yet God, when he's allowed to work through your story to impact someone else's story, and not just their story, but often the generations of stories that are being told from that is so powerful.
Right. Well, and what you're touching on too is humility, right? Unless you're truly humble, we hide those things. We don't want to tell those stories. Nobody wants to broadcast our failures, right? But when you are humble, when your identity is in Christ, it's really not that hard because you realize that your humility means that you are growing and maturing, and then when you share your story, the humility is it's not very difficult. Once you are humble, once you truly trust in the Lord in that moment and in every moment, the humility's there. You tell your story, and there's no shame. And like you said, then the walls come down, and other people they feel more secure and safer to share their stories. And all of our stories really should point others to Christ, not to us. Our stories aren't to say, "Look what I did," and elevate myself. All of our testimonies should elevate the Lord.
Mhm. Before we wrap up, I would like to ask, we have obviously people who are founders, entrepreneurs, people who are in leadership positions who have incredible stories that I feel like are just ready to be told, these beautiful glory stories that are being painted through the work that God is doing in them now. What word would you give them as far as shifting into a place of being able to get more clarity and confidence, or just being able to relax and use what God has placed in their hands to go out and make the kingdom impact that we know they want to make?
Well, again, I will kind of tie it to sports. If you're going to be a good athlete, you got to get in the gym every day. I have developed the habit, thank the Lord, of getting up and every morning I read my Bible. And just like you got to make sure as an athlete, you get your protein intake, you hydrate. Well, you got to do it every day. You need to read your Bible each and every day. Start your day the right way. Get into the Word, read it. And then also, my experience from getting sucked into this tiny little cult leaders prey on those who are vulnerable. Well, when you are isolated, you're not in community, in fellowship with other believers, then you are isolated and vulnerable. So in addition to reading your word each and every day, you got to have also, a community around you. And really, that's the body of Christ. Where you have other voices speaking into you, you are mentoring other people. To me, those are really the two keys. And those are daily habits. And if you do those two things,
Mhm.
whether you're a basketball player or the banker, the butcher, or the baker, right? Those habits will help you be successful in life.
Love that. Can you tell our audience what are some good places to find you and maybe learn a little bit more about your books and where they can get them?
Sure. So you can go to my website. It's authorpeteryoung.com. Again, I've got 3 books. They're all on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, and other places. And if you go to my website, I love coming on podcasts like this and sharing my stories. I also do speak publicly. And, you can contact me as well if you've got any direct questions. I love hearing from my readers. And I love hearing from people too that have read my books and that's had an impact on their life. So if that's you, if you read one of my books, I would love to hear from you.
Excellent. All right, you guys. Well, as normal, I will make sure that you have all the links in the captions below. Before you go, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can catch more on building a brand and business that you genuinely love and go out and make the kingdom impact that you have been called to make. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate all the wisdom and the insight that you brought to the conversation. And I look forward to seeing where you go with what God's taking you into next.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you. Take care, you guys. Bye.